Hi, this is Matt Baker. Last week I did a video exploring 3 different meanings of the word Israel, because depending on the context, Israel could be referring to ancient Israel, or it could be referring to the Jewish people, or it could be referring to the modern state of Israel. Well, this week I thought it would be suitable to follow up with a video exploring 3 different meanings of the word Palestine. You see, when I say Palestine, I could be referring to Palestine as a geographic area. Or I could be referring to the current state of Palestine, which is recognized by 157 countries, but still under military occupation by Israel. Or I could be referring to some sort of more ideal future Palestine, one in which Palestinians either have their own state free from occupation, i.e. a two-state solution, or one in which Arabs and Jews live together with equal rights, in some sort of United States of Israel and Palestine, i.e. a one-state solution. Let's start with the word Palestine as a strictly geographic term, because in this sense, the word Palestine has been in use for a very long time. And by very long, I mean at least 2,400 years. The earliest known use of the word Palestine in the geographic sense can be found in the works of Herodotus, the famous father of history, who lived in the 400s BCE. In his work Histories, Book 3, Chapter 91, when discussing the region during the Persian period, he writes, "In this province was all of Phoenicia, and the part of Syria called Palestine, as well as Cyprus." Now, why would he refer to that area as Palestine if, as we know from Persian sources, it was also the location at that time of a province called Yehud, meaning Judah? Well, here's the thing. The ancient kingdom of Judah, which I talked about in my last video, never really controlled the coastal area next to it. It sometimes made gains there, but its core territory was always the Judean hill country, in and around Jerusalem. The cities along the coast were primarily inhabited by a people group known as the Philistines, who show up in Egyptian, Assyrian, and Babylonian records, as well as in the Bible, as a major enemy of the Judahites. But around 600 BCE, the Philistines basically disappear from history, likely being absorbed into Persian and then later Greek culture, unlike the Jews who retained a distinct identity. However, after their disappearance, the word Philistine, now pronounced Palestine, continued to be used in a geographic sense for the area where the Philistines once lived. Now, if we move forward in time, the coastal area becomes controlled by the Jews for the first time during the Hasmonean and Herodian periods, and then in 6 CE ends up as a part of the Roman province of Judea. Now, this is important because I've heard some people claim that Jesus was a Palestinian, which is misleading because he more accurately was a Jew and for his entire adult life lived within the Roman province of Judea. Aside from the coastal cities, Judea was not referred to as Palestine until about 100 years after the death of Jesus. What happened then was that around 135 CE, there was a major revolt by the Jews, led by a man named Simon Bar Kokhba. In the end, the Romans quashed the revolt and basically razed all of Judea, killing about 2/3 of the Jewish population there and deporting most of the rest. In order to further punish the Jews, the Romans renamed the entire province Palestine after the Jews' old enemy, the Philistines. And ever since then, Palestine has been the primary geographic name for the area. For example, when the area was conquered by the Arabs, and then later by the Turks, they continued to use the name, pronouncing it Philistin. Even the Jews who continued to live in the area, and then the early Zionists, originally referred to themselves as Palestinian Jews, in contrast to the Palestinian Arabs. It was only after the creation of the State of Israel in 1948 that the Jews living there became known as Israelis, with the word Palestinian generally being reserved for the Arab residents only, including both Muslims and Christians. But even so, the word Palestine can still be used to describe the overall geographic area, now controlled by Israel, and is in fact sometimes still used in that way, especially in academic contexts. However, these days the term Southern Levant is increasingly used in order to avoid any confusion. Now, before I continue, I want to shout out today's sponsor, Ground News, which is the website and app that I use to keep up with events happening around the world. What makes Ground News different is that it pulls headlines from multiple sources, including newspapers, podcasts, and websites. It then categorizes them on a continuum from left to right, so that you get to look at the same news story from multiple angles. Something that is particularly important when it comes to events happening in, say, the Middle East. For example, here's a story about a recent survey that asked American Jews what they thought about the Israel-Gaza situation. Notice how this left-wing source reported a decline in support for Israel, whereas this right-wing source reported that opinions were divided. Ground News also has a blind spot feed, which highlights stories that one side of the spectrum is barely covering at all. For example, very few right-wing sources covered this story about how U.S. support for Israel is slipping, whereas very few left-wing sources covered this story about how the Democrats are divided on the issue. As you can see by checking the blind spot feed, you can avoid getting trapped in your usual media bubble. So don't wait. Subscribe now by going to ground.news/charts or by using the link in the description or pinned comment. If you use that address or link, you will get 40% off unlimited access to their Vantage plan. Again, that's ground.news/charts. Okay, returning to the different meanings of the word Palestine. As we've already seen, the word Palestine in the geographic sense has been in use for a very long time. But you see, ever since the Philistines disappeared and the ancient Jews were mostly kicked out, the inhabitants of Palestine have never been independent. Instead, it's just been a steady stream of one foreign invader after another. So when it comes to their DNA, the modern Palestinians are likely a mix of Canaanite, Egyptian, Philistine, Israelite, Persian, Greek, Roman, Northern Arab, Southern Arab, European Crusader, even more Arab, and Turk. In other words, they likely descend at least a little bit from every people group that has ever lived or passed through the area. But the important thing to note is that they do not primarily just descend from the Arabs who took over Palestine during the Muslim conquests of the 7th century. Recent studies have shown that despite all the foreign invaders, a good portion of their DNA also matches very closely to the Bronze Age Canaanites who lived there 4,000 years ago. Now, some people argue that since the Palestinians have never had their own state in the past, that they don't deserve to have one today. Well, that's ridiculous because most countries formed during the 20th and 21st centuries were created not based on past independence, but based on the recognition that the people living there in the present share a common language, culture, history, and religion. In fact, had it not been for the Zionist movement, Palestine almost certainly would have achieved independence around the same time and in the same manner that other nearby countries did. You see, in the years following World War I, Britain and France recognized that the Levant should be divided into 4 new countries: Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. In fact, they provisionally recognized the independence of all 4 countries, while at the same time governing them as separate mandatories. But keep in mind that the goal of these mandatories was simply to provide temporary assistance. In the case of Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, all 3 achieved full independence by 1946, but Palestine did not. This is because the British promised the land to both the local Arab inhabitants as well as to the Zionist settlers. In 1947, the UN attempted to fix the problem by proposing the creation of 2 Palestinian states, one for Arabs and one for Jews. However, because the Zionists agreed, but the Arabs did not, a war ensued, resulting in the creation of the State of Israel, as well as the Nakba, in which an estimated 750,000 Palestinian Arabs were displaced. The majority ended up in either the Gaza Strip, which became a military protectorate of Egypt, or the West Bank, which was annexed by Jordan. But then came the Six-Day War in 1967, in which Israel captured these 2 areas. And ever since then, Israel has had, in one way or another, control over both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, which are now often referred to as the Palestinian territories. So how then did the current state of Palestine come to exist? Well, as you can imagine, it's a bit complicated. During the 1960s, a coalition known as the PLO, or Palestine Liberation Organization, was founded. And during the 1970s, they, now led by Yasser Arafat, were recognized by most of the world as the main representative of the Palestinian people. Initially, they advocated for the complete dismantling of the State of Israel and occasionally used violence to work towards that goal. In 1988, they even declared independence, proclaiming that everything within the borders of what had been mandatory Palestine was now the State of Palestine. Of course, this was only on paper because in reality, Israel still controlled all of that area. But then in 1993, a major change occurred. In what is known as the Oslo Accord, the PLO renounced violence and recognized Israel's right to exist, in return for Israel recognizing the PLO as the sole representative of the Palestinian people and agreeing to let them have some self-governance within the West Bank and Gaza. Since then, the number of UN member states recognizing the State of Palestine has increased to 157, which is about 81%. But still, the State of Palestine does not have full independence. Even when Israel withdrew their military from Gaza in 2005, it still maintained full control over its airspace, seaports, border crossings, population registry, electricity grid, and so on. Of course, as of 2026, 90% of Gaza now lies in ruins. In the West Bank, Israel continues to have an even tighter grip, not to mention the many illegal settlements it has there. So that's the current situation in Palestine, as defined by the second definition, meaning the official State of Palestine. On paper, it exists, but in reality, the people there have very little actual freedom. Which brings me to the third definition of Palestine, the one that is evoked every time someone shouts "Free Palestine" or holds up a sign with those words. Every time that happens, a new Palestine is being envisioned, either one in which the Palestinian people have full sovereignty over both the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, or one in which the Palestinian people enjoy the same rights and freedoms as the Israelis currently do. Obviously, when and how this future Palestine will come to fruition is totally up in the air right now. Lots of solutions to the current conflict have been proposed over the years, but so far, none have been accepted by the two sides involved. So, to sum up, here's a chart explaining the three meanings of the word Palestine. The first meaning covers Palestine as a geographic term, which from 600 BCE to 135 CE referred only to the former Philistine territories, but from 135 CE onwards refers to everything from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. The second meaning refers to the State of Palestine, established in 1988, a state which currently exists on paper but not in reality, because it has never had full sovereignty. Finally, the third meaning refers to a future Palestine, one in which everyone living in the geographic region of Palestine will have full rights and freedoms. So that was a look at the word Palestine. If you want to keep up with the latest news from that region of the world, be sure to sign up for Ground News using the link in the description or pinned comment, or by going to groundnews.com/charts. Thanks for watching.